Hello, welcome back to Mark's Garden UK. I'm Mark, and these are my brand new VEGEGA metal raised beds, and I love them. There's so many things I love about these beds, and I'll tell you about that in a minute, but there is one slight problem. How do you fill it? Look at this, a big plastic tub. It would probably cost me about £12 to £15 to go and buy compost to fill that. And there's probably, if I weigh it up, about 10 of those in there. So there's 120 quid just for one raised bed. And then if you do the same exercise along here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, another 12 there, there's £150 in compost, and another raised bed over there. So we're knocking on the door of £400 in compost, which rather takes away some of the pleasure of having these amazing raised beds. I love these. I've had my eye on these for some time. I love the look of them. I love the capacity of them. I love the fact that you're gardening at this level, which is very accessible. I like the fact that you can order them one day and they're delivered the next day, and you can put them together in an hour, which is instant. You don't get that with a lot of raised beds. You're effectively having a raised bed in a couple of days. But this is a slight problem. So in this video, I'm going to share with you my innovative thoughts and ideas on how to fill these raised beds. Now, I'm going to fill these raised beds with all kinds of things, which I think you can probably get access to for free. So I'll be going through a list of things, but one of the things I would say is variety is the spice of life. In order for things to happen, compost to break down, you want a mixture of the elements carbon and nitrogen. Now, woody material tends to be mainly carbon, and grassy green material tends to be nitrogen, and you need to be mixing that together to make things happen. And if you do that, don't worry, the microbes and the microorganisms and the invertebrates in the soil will turn that into a lovely, rich plant food. So let's get started. And the first thing I'm going to put right in the bottom of my big raised bed here are some logs. Think about it. You're only really growing in the top third to a half. The bottom third can be a massive carbon store. So if you put some logs at the bottom of there, they will act as a slow release fertilizer. And don't worry, the worms and the invertebrates will nibble away at them, and they'll bring them up into the soil above. And the plant roots, some of them which do go deep, will get down there and start eating away, and that will become a slow release plant food. So I'm going to put some logs, big, small logs, lots of different varieties of logs. I've even got a huge, great big log here near the camera. Look at that. And that will do a lot of good in the very bottom of this raised bed here. So that's going in there too. Now that's a lot of carbon gone into my raised bed. I need to also add some nitrogen, so mixed in amongst that, I will be putting some of these leaves off this hedge and some grass cuttings. But just going back to the cost for a moment, the volume of this large log is probably about one great big bag of compost. So you've probably saved 10 quid just by putting that log in the bottom. And as they rot down and decay, they'll act as sponges and they'll retain water. The other thing you can put in to enhance the carbon content is cardboard. This is the packaging that the raised beds came in. So put some cardboard in. Now these are going to come in handy in a moment, and I'll tell you why. Because I'm going to use these in a very particular way to help me get some organic matter into these raised beds. But already, as you can see here, the bottom of this raised bed is slowly but surely filling up. And I love the idea of this old dead wood feeding this soil for years to come. And these raised beds will last 20 years, so there's no doubt that this has got enough time to decay and produce food for the soil above it. When we talk about decay, we think about death, we think about things dying, but actually in this sense, decay in here is life being created in front of our very eyes. Microbes, microorganisms, invertebrates, worms, all chomping away, nibbling on this organic matter. And as they nibble and chomp and digest, they excrete, and it's the excretion which provides the food for the soil. They also aerate the soil by going through it and making little channels of air, and those channels of air will allow oxygen to the tree roots and also to the other invertebrates. It's a wonderful ecosystem in the bottom of this single raised bed. And now look at this massive big hunk of wood here. This is years of growth in a tree that I had to cut down because it was becoming dangerous. That's years of sequestering carbon from the environment. And all that carbon that is stored in there is going to be future stored in the bottom of this raised bed. It makes me feel quite virtuous. You don't have to have a log pile that you can see for wildlife. You can have a log pile in the bottom of your raised bed, and that's what I'm doing here effectively. And a log pile at the bottom of a raised bed will do just as much good for wildlife, different habitats for different types of creatures in the bottom of a raised bed than it will do when it's exposed to the air. So let's get this big hunk of carbon into the bottom of this raised bed. Be careful with the braces when you're moving big lumps of wood like this around. And so in that goes very carefully, very gently onto a bed of nitrogen rich leaf and grass to do its work for years to come. Isn't that amazing? And there we've probably saved another £12 in compost. So we're doing well, aren't we? Because already we've got nearly a foot of the bottom of this raised bed full of organic matter. Now there's nothing to stop you putting polystyrene or grit or gravel or waste in the bottom of there if you want to, but I've got this thing where I just want organic matter from the top to the bottom so that the life can come through from the soil beneath and come up. So that's why I'm using fully organic. But we're doing well. Keep your eye on these, by the way, because you're going to be seeing these put to good effect any moment, because I've got another trick up my sleeve for you. So we've got quite a lot of dense carbon rich matter in here. I feel the need to add a bit more greenery to this mix. So we'll put some grass cuttings in here now. Now grass cuttings, great. It's a good mix, so long as you've got variety, don't worry, get some grass cuttings. It's going to be deep in the bottom of this bed for years to come, and it's going to add to that rich soup of life in the bottom of this raised bed. So here I am, reversing in with a wheelbarrow load of grass cuttings. Now, this is last week's cuttings, and it's already started to decompose, so that will already be full of life, and I'm just sprinkling that in and on and amongst these logs. It will fill in around some of the gaps. Do be careful when you're handling old grass cuttings, by the way, because there are some dusts and some microbacteria there that you shouldn't breathe in, but this is not in that position yet. But here we go. I'm just sprinkling that on top, and that's providing a lovely nitrogen rich layer. And as I'm doing this, I'm thinking of that primeval soup that you used to hear about when you were doing your O-levels. The primeval soup that they say life evolved from. And this is a similar process. Life will start growing in this, the bottom of this raised bed. Now, this is all quite dry matter. So I'm going to start watering this down, because another thing that life needs is water. And if I fill it right to the top before I put some water in, the water may never permeate down to these lower levels. So I'm going to give it a good wetting. And I'm going to retrieve my water from this plunge. It's a little water butt at the back of my shed, and it sits here, and all week it's getting all kinds of life developing in it. So I'm going to add that life to my raised bed. Isn't it wonderful? And of course, if you haven't got a water butt full of green soup, a hosepipe will do the trick. Now, there's another thing you could add at this stage, which would be wonderful, and I am going to do it, is some nettles. Who hasn't got a nettle patch in their garden or nearby that they can't go and take some nettles from? Nettles are rich in nitrogen. By putting them in there, they will add to that mix. Now, there is a thing you can do with nettles, which is making plant food. You just put them in a bucket of water and leave it for 4 weeks with a brick on it, and soon you'll have a lovely water-based liquid plant food. And you can see a video on that on my channel. I'll put the link at the end of this one. So I'm now going to add some nettles. Obviously, you need to be wearing long sleeves and gloves when you're dealing with nettles. And so I manage a couple of nettle patches here at the back of my wildlife pond. It's one of nature's best cut and come again crops. You can do so many things with nettles. You can eat them like spinach. You can make tea with them. You can make plant food with them, and they're great for the wildlife. The butterflies love to lay their eggs on them, and they're very rich in all kinds of different compounds, and they're great for the compost heap. And you'll always have a ready supply of them to put in your raised beds. And so in go our nettles. Break things up a little bit to start the process of decay. And some interesting facts about nettles. They used to make rope out of them because they're quite sinewy, especially when the branches get old. And also, Roman soldiers used to whip themselves with the stinging parts of nettles to warm themselves up on cold winter's nights when they were on a mission. To complement the nitrogen of the nettles, let's throw in a bit of carbon. Remove the polythene. Don't use glossy cardboard. The plain brown cardboard is the best type. And of course, the process will work much better if you give it a bit of a kickstart with a bit of water. Now, I'll tell you what this is for next. So what are these for? I've been going on about them. Find a local stables or a farm. My neighbour's got ponies and he loves me taking manure because it's one less problem for him to deal with. But the point behind these is they're much easier to load up with manure, that I find, than polythene bags. You know, if you were to use an old compost bag and try and get it into the bag, it's quite difficult. Whereas with the boxes like this, you can just spade it straight in, and then you can put the lid on top. Whenever I put the lid, and you can put the lid on top and load it into your car, and it's slightly more hygienic. And the other thing at this end, when you come to putting it into the raised bed, it's much more easy to put that in and tip it out than it would be with a wheelbarrow, handballing it with your spade. So that's why I'm suggesting borrow a couple of these out the garage. So I will now go and collect some manure. I don't have to go in my car, it's only around the corner. I'll see you in a minute when I've gathered up some manure. And don't worry too much about it having to be well rotted manure. It's all going at the bottom of a raised bed. It will rot down in the fullness of time. Imagine the life and goodness that is in this compost and this manure already. Fantastic. It absolutely reeks, this stuff. It stinks. But I see that as a good thing, because that's life producing gases. Let's get it in here. And as I said earlier, it's a lot more manageable when it's in these boxes, because you can lift it over, providing you don't overload them. I think I've put a little bit too much in this one. And then you can just tip it out. They say gardening is hard work. I wouldn't disagree with that. But isn't that a good thing? I'm going to put some more cardboard in, layer it up. Think of a lasagna. They do talk about these lasagnas nowadays when they talk about putting bulbs in. Well, this is a different type of lasagna. This is a raised bed lasagna. Carbon and nitrogen. And then I'll give that a bit more of a soak. Now here's another little freebie tip for you. You might be thinking, what if I don't have piles of garden waste? Well, ask a friend, ask a neighbour. We have a WhatsApp group for our little village, and whenever I need something, I just put a little post in there. So if you ask your friends or your neighbours, have you got any garden waste? I'm sure some of them would be delighted if you came and took it away. My neighbour donated all these branches here which were taken off her bay tree, which had a bad time over the winter. All that can go in the bottom of my raised bed, and it will. And here's another little tip for you. Get your loppers. The smaller things are, the faster they break down, because they have a higher surface area per volume ratio. So it basically means that there's more space for the bugs and the bacteria to get inside. So just spend a bit of time with your loppers, just chopping away at stuff, and just make it smaller. And it will also make it easier to compact down. But there we have another layer of carbon in our raised bed lasagna. Isn't that wonderful? I can actually smell the bay. It's a lovely smell. It's very evocative of the Mediterranean and cooking. I love it. So we're over half full now. When we get to this top bit, we need to start thinking of the makeup of the matter, because this is where we'll be planting. The stuff below that is plant food, and it's slow release over the long term plant food. So we do need to start thinking when we get to the top third about the soil matter, because that's what we're going to plant into. But I've still got some space to fill, and the next thing I'm going to put in is all those plants that died over this really severe winter that we've just had. And it's a shame to lose those plants, but it's a wonderful feeling knowing that they're going to go in here and provide some food. Now some of them are quite big pots, so I'm going to chop them up into chunks and distribute them evenly across this next layer, another layer in the lasagna. It's a real shame about this. This was a lovely plant, but this one has now been dead for 2 years, so I know it's not coming back. These are my agapanthus. I'm going to leave those a little bit longer. I've not got much hope for them, but it's still too soon to say. But here is one of my lovely palms from a couple of years ago, and it's not coming back to life. The whole thing is going in, root, plant and all, and even this spent soil. Remembering that golden rule, variety is the spice of life, and all this is going in to that primeval soup of life that we're creating beneath our veg plot. Don't worry about these weeds, they're going to be buried, they're going to die, they're going to add to the plant food. Lots of last year's Colocasia esculenta, which sadly did not make it through winter storage. These were stored upstairs in the loft above my garage, but it was such a brutal winter that even up there, upstairs, inside, they didn't make it through. It's a tragedy, because I was hoping to sell these. And my next tip is raid your own compost heap. I've been collecting all my garden and organic waste in this big empty bulk bag, and it's formed compost. It's been in there for nearly 12 months, and it's broken down, and it's gone through the winter, through all that frost, and all that's helped to make lovely compost in there. So why not use the compost that you've been collecting in the top of your raised bed? That's what you were doing it for in the first place. And as I tip this into this box to go into my raised bed, I can see that it's already teeming with life. It's already half established. It's going to do the job for me, that. Let's get it in there. If you haven't got your own compost heap, phone a friend, ask a neighbour. Everyone's got a pile of garden waste somewhere they want to get rid of. Look at this, what I found inside my bulk bag compost store. A colony of snails. Look at them, there's 3 of them there. Now I don't kill snails, I just relocate them. They're welcome in my garden, so long as there's a good balance, I don't mind. Interesting fact about snails like this, in parts of the UK, mainly in the southern areas, they call these wallfish, and they eat them. and they go and pluck them off the rocks in the walls. That's why they call them wallfish. And they eat them like they do in France, like escargot. I don't fancy those for my breakfast, so I'm going to put them in the hedgerow over here. And you know, it feels so good to be emptying the compost heap into this raised bed, so that all this lovely organic matter which I've collected the last 18 months or so is going to be put to its intended purpose. And you can see we're getting quite near the top now. This is the planting zone, so we really do need to start thinking about the type of stuff we put in here. I've got another idea for you in a moment, but let me just put this next bag of compost in. In it goes. Level it off. It's full of life. I can see flies and insects and worms. It's wonderful stuff, that. Fantastic. So my final tip for filling the top layer of your raised bed is, why not dig a pond, or better still, a wildlife pond. I've just finished mine. I've been left with this huge big pile of spoil. Now this bit over here to my right here has got a wildflower meadow sown into it, so I'm going to leave that, and that's doing well at the moment. But over here I've got some lovely fine topsoil to go at, so all that can now be transferred to the top layer of my raised bed. And that's a lovely fine sandy tilth. It's well drained and it's got quite a bit of organic matter in it, and I can enrich it with more compost, and that will help me just fill that top planting layer in my raised bed. So there you go, some innovative ideas on how you can fill your huge raised beds either free or on a budget. Now of course you might want to enrich the top layer with a little bit of shop bought compost or your own homemade compost. But the point I'm making is you don't need to worry about filling that whole vast quantity of raised bed if you come up with some innovative ideas, and I hope you found those helpful and thought-provoking. Good luck with your raised beds. Don't forget there's a link to the VEGEGA raised beds in the description box below this video, and if you go ahead and buy one, I will earn a commission, and I appreciate your support. I'll see you very soon when I start planting some vegetables into my raised beds. Bye for now.